Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2021. I'm Gigi from what3words, and I'm here to have a conversation with my colleague Iannish about accessible design. So, like I said, I'm Gigi. I work at what3words and I lead our accessibility efforts. I am a white woman in my late 20s, have long blonde hair, wearing glasses, and today I'm wearing a Bordeaux top. For those of you who don't know what3words is, what3words is the simplest way to talk about location. We split the world into a grid of 3 meter by 3 meter squares, and then we've given every 3 meter square in the world a unique combination of 3 words from the dictionary. So that means that you can speak about any location in the world with the precision of 3 meters and the simplicity of just 3 words. So that's what3words in a nutshell, but today we're here to talk about accessible design and how we can start thinking about accessibility from the beginning with design. So I've asked my colleague Iannish to join me in this really interesting conversation. Iannish, welcome.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Iannish. I'm a senior product designer at what3words. I'm an Afro-Indian looking man. I have got no glasses on, unlike Gigi, and I have got a cream top on, and I'm very proud of my man bun, which not everybody's a fan of. So hello, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's one that's overdue.
Thank you, Iannish. Yeah, really excited for this conversation too. Let's start with my first question. What is accessibility to you?
Oh, that's a controversial question, Gigi. Okay. I think to me, I prefer a more broad definition to accessibility. So I think for me, accessibility is the degree to which a product is as reachable to as many people as possible. As many people as possible. So, and I like that broad definition because I think it invites people from all ranges, whether they have an impairment or not, to be involved in the conversation. It makes accessibility a little bit more accessible, I think. How
I
about
love that.
yourself? How would you define accessibility?
Well, I think for me, accessibility is about access to information. And so it's about removing the barriers that we have everywhere, but I'm, specifically focusing on the digital world, any barriers that we have in the digital world that would prevent someone from accessing XYZ in terms of information. And so, in that respect, it just, for me, it means making products, making technologies accessible for people with disabilities so that everyone can access the same information in different ways, but access the same information. So that's what I would understand by accessibility.
Yeah, no. I think that's massively on point. I agree with a lot of that, definitely.
Great. So, we've had a lot of conversations about this, Yanish, and, just design. And one of the things that strikes me is that, I don't know if everyone knows this, but 67% of accessibility issues originate at design, right? So design is actually a very important part of accessibility. And so, you're the expert in design, and we're here to talk about this today. Like, what would you say are the most common accessibility issues that originate at design that you've seen?
Okay, so I think I am in one thing I want to just sort of say up front is that while I am very well versed in the world of design, I wouldn't necessarily say that at the beginning of this process I was expert in accessibility. In fact, I don't think I am at all. But I am someone who's embraced accessibility as a design tool to help empower designers, not just for sort of people who have impairment, but for the entire user base. So I think the first, if you like, faux pas of addressing accessibility when it comes to the design process is actually the understanding of design itself. Often I think people misunderstand dynamic design. And that's where I think where the problem comes in. So for example, when you're designing a text field on a UI or an interface, or if you're designing a search box, whatever it might be, often a designer will look at it as though it's the visual elements that are on the page, because that's how they experience it. Whereas in reality, it's not just that. That text field needs to grow and shrink in terms of what the native
Mm.
text size is of that device. It needs to be able to be put into multiple different variations of scripts for languages that are translated, some that go, are left justified and some that are right justified. There are many different types of things. So I think the first faux pas that I can give to any designer who is starting their accessibility journey is try and avoid thinking about design from a very static point of view. When you're designing for anything or UX or UI related, things that are dynamic on a digital product, you've got to think about it from the point of view of what are all the different contexts that I'm going to be able to design for? Where is this going to be represented? Not just in my sketch screen, not just in my Figma file, not just in my world, but when I present it on a desktop, what is it going to look like? When I present it on a mobile phone in the middle of Mongolia, what is that going to look like?
Mm.
When I present it to someone who can't see the UI at all and they need to read it, using some type of technology that sits on top of the web, what is that going to experience be like? And that, to be honest with you, yes, this is my whole point about sort of accessibility for everyone is that's not just good practice when it comes to people who have an impairment, but that's good practice for everybody. It just makes the
Yeah.
product a lot more accessible. So yeah, if you like, the first faux pas I would say is reframe the way you think about accessibility and design in terms of being more dynamic. Start with a dynamic approach. Don't be stuck in your own world.
Can you give me an example of a specific example of when that's been sort of, is it, being landscape mode or portrait, or like what's a specific example that you can give us here?
Okay. A basic example of this is, let's say you have a phone that you are designing for. That person creates an interface with a title on it. But that title is not uploaded as, let's say, a dynamic font where the computer can read it, or, for example, a search engine can read it, whatever it is. It's uploaded as an image because the designer says, okay, I really want this cool typography font. The developer is not going to get enough time to develop it. So the shortcut for me is just to upload an image and convert it to maybe an SVG or whatever it is. And what they forget to do is add like alt text afterwards that allows like a screen reader to be able to digest it. And it means that if you have a translation piece of technology that sits on top of it, they won't be able to understand it because it's just an image to them. So those are the shortcuts in design where I think when you're thinking about creating something that's more accessible, you're almost designing with data. And that data should be dynamic so it can be manipulated across many different sort of territories, but also many different devices. When you scale up that interface, is that image going to scale up, and is it going to have the same properties as a rich font? Fonts have so many different intricacies to them. They've got the size, the leading, the kerning. They've got many different properties to them, which it allows them to be scaled in a way that is accessible. And an image just doesn't have that same level of deep thought, design, or deep design thinking. So that's just one example of many, many, many others I could give you. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, dynamic design approach is the biggest faux pas. Think about designing with data rather than designing with just the visual interface. Yeah.
Designing with data. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
I
really
have a
great.
question for you though, Gigi.
All right.
Okay. So rather than the nitty gritty of I suppose, of the nerdy side of design, but it's a slightly bigger question is, for you as someone who has been involved with the accessibility conversation at what3words for such a long time, how do you inject what's accessibility into the culture of a company? Like, how do you go about that? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people here listening going, okay, where do I start my accessibility journey? And it's the little that I know, it's not necessarily the simplest of problems to solve.
Yeah, no, indeed. But I mean, there's a few things that I've done, and I think ultimately my sort of conclusion is that when you come to people and tell them, hey, like I want to do something about accessibility so that people with disabilities can access our product or experience or whatever it may be, like no one's going to tell you, no, I don't want to do it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
People like want to do it. People want to have a product that's accessible, right? So it's not about the desire. It's often either they might not have the information, so they might not know, what do I need to do to make sure that what I'm doing in my job in my day to day is making it as accessible as possible for our users. So what do I need to do, or like how much resources is this going to take, like how much time, etc., etc. So I think for me it's like making it very simple for everyone in the company to understand what role they have to play in order to work towards that goal of making that company or that product more accessible. So if we're talking to someone in social media, like what steps do you need to take to make the social media content of your company more accessible, right? There's a few things to follow there. Or if you're talking to product, like what, or designers or developers, like what are the, and just really trying to take something that in accessibility, which, let's be honest, it's quite complex, like the guidelines are quite complex, and we're trying to take something like that and really make it simple and digestible so that someone that is not an accessibility professional can just do it on their day-to-day job. And so I think that's been, for me, one of the big lessons. Another one as well, which I think has been very helpful in furthering the culture of accessibility at what3words, is creating a network of accessibility champions. So
Mm,
going out
yeah.
and finding these people in the company, including you, Iannish, that really, believe in accessibility and want to make it happen and want to work hard so that the accessibility of the company improves. And so finding those people and then building your network and making it a bit of, an accessibility army, or a group of people working towards that. And it doesn't have to be just in product, like I said, it could be social media, sales, marketing, etc. So
Right.
a lot of different sort of areas of the company. And I think lastly, sort of making it simple, and then sort of accessibility champion networks. And then lastly, also just, I think this is more particular to what3words, but just showing to the company and the rest of the employees the value that what3words as a product can bring to people with disabilities. And so a lot of that for me was going out and talking to venues, for example, and telling them, venues like the O2 now or the Barbie can use what3words to direct their visitors to the exact entrance, the step-free entrance,
Right.
for example. And so doing sort of these partnerships with these companies and venues, because they find what3words really helpful for their visitors. But I think that just also for the rest of the company, it makes the value of accessibility and how much value what3words can bring to accessibility more clear and more obvious for everyone in the company. So yeah, those would be the three things that I think for me so far I've learned in terms of bringing accessibility to what3words.
Mm. I would concur with that sort of description, especially I think what rings true for me is your description of how talking to different departments can using different language to make accessibility more accessible to them. Because I think a lot of people tend to they freak out, right? Like they massively
Yeah,
freak out when you say accessibility. Like, oh God. And
yeah,
we're openly honest saying we're not accessibility experts. And I think I've seen a couple of approaches to accessibility, right? When you're trying to properly like go into bringing on accessibility as part of the thinking in a company. One is how you hire an external team, you almost do like you
mm,
outsource the problem, right? And then I
yeah,
think
yeah,
uh, the other one is sort of, okay, let's just bring in an in-house team, but a dedicated accessibility team is going to sit over there. But I
mm,
think it's, I mean, to give a couple of examples, I think
mm,
a wide-reaching example, I think accessibility is a bit like design systems, or
mm,
if you like, they're a bit like SEO. It's not really ever complete. It's kind of like
mm.
you're on a
Exactly.
constant journey, and it requires everybody from multiple different disciplines to come together and understand it. So the education process of accessibility is, I think, is extraordinarily important, because if you have an isolated team, it almost sometimes it could become like them versus us. And absolutely, I
And I
definitely
think
concur with
you're
the
so
heroes.
right. I think you're so right. I mean, I think that's how accessibility is going to be successful. That's how we're going to go from, is it, I think 10% of websites in the world today that are accessible versus all of them being accessible. It's through
Yeah,
the education piece, right? It's through not just having a team dedicated to accessibility, but to having every designer and every engineer and every tester doing accessibility, and every person in social media and marketing doing accessibility as part of their job. So I mean,
absolutely.
that's my vision for accessibility and for the future, and obviously education is a big part of that. You mentioned sort of design systems, and I know we've talked about this before, and I think today I'd love for the audience to sort of come out of this talk with a bit of a, I don't know if checklist, but at least a quick list of things that they can be thinking about when they're designing for
Okay.
with accessibility in mind. So if we
As
were to start building a checklist, by no means exhaustive because there's a lot of things out there, but
yeah.
um, a small list of like quick wins or first things to think about when you're thinking of designing with accessibility, what would that be?
Accessibility cheat sheet. Oh God.
Yeah, love that.
So I think anybody who's touched on accessibility or has gone from the design point of view and kind of gone, okay, I'm going to approach accessibility and be that hero. It's like the content out there is exhaustive. The WCAG guidelines are ridiculously long, comprehensive, and very well, they're super thorough. And if you manage to get through all of that, like kudos. That's
Respect,
a
yeah.
massive respect, bro. I was like, okay. But I think to answer your question, which is like this design checklist, let's qualify design first, okay? Because like I think this is something that whoever the designers are that may be watching this, they may come from a spectrum of different backgrounds. So I think I'll classify design in sort of like 4 different categories. The first one is sort of design thinking. This is the broad level of how can I use my design thinking? So i.e. here's a problem, empathize with said problem and said user, and then solve that problem by using multiple different tests to really empathize with their problem and leverage the company's clout. So basically that as sort of high level design thinking. The second one is interaction design. So we're talking about sort of the components that you use, like you tap here, where does it go? When you interact with the drop down field, how does that micro interaction sort of feel and look, and those journeys. And the third one is visual design. Visual design being, okay, how does the thing look? We are using a certain set of colors to ensure that everybody can read them, no matter what impairments you have. And then finally, and this one is one that is really often missed, is content design, right? Content design. So I'm talking about someone who's creating the image that needs to go into a component, and he needs to make sure that it's sized correctly at all the different aspect ratios, so that if that image has got, for whatever reason, a piece of text that cannot be added digitally, it still appears on the image. It has a safe area, if you like. So those are the 4 aspects, I think, which I'm going to cover in this, if you like, this checklist. Design thinking, the sort of top tier level, interaction design, visual design, and content design. All those is what I mean when we're talking about this design checklist. And I think the thing that helps the most is not to isolate them. Not to isolate them. The moment you are designing content, but you're not talking to the person who's doing the interaction design or building that component, I can definitely tell you that we were definitely a victim of that. You end up with a set of components that can often be very confusing for everybody involved. So the first part of this checklist is talk to the other designers and understand what they're doing. 100% talk. So at the highest level, which is sort of design thinking, I found that the first thing that helps, if you like, along this checklist is accessibility for everyone. It's the kind of thing that we spoke about very briefly at the top of this chat. Think less about sort of the 20% and fixing those specific problems, but how can I make my product as accessible to as many people as possible? Then I think for all the other areas of sort of design, there are 4 principles which I think that can help you, like in your hands-on day when you're literally in Figma or you're in Sketch, whatever it is, or if you're doing a developer handoff, whatever it is, your day-to-day, these are the things that will help you. So the first one is what we call the perceivable principle. And these are things like font sizes, right? You need to make sure that your font size is big enough and readable enough. And you need to ensure that the color contrast of those fonts on those backgrounds, whether it's dark or whether it's light themes, is checking out.
Yeah.
You have standards of accessibility. You have AA and you have AAA standards of accessibility. And in your tools, I specifically will quote here the Stark plugin for those designers there. They have a really great way of kind of just, you have a piece of text within your design and you have a background, and you can just use this plugin to just check the contrast. And it'll give you a breakdown of
So what should the contrast be?
The contrast should be 3:1, basically.
3:1, yeah.
That's kind of what you're looking for at a base level minimum. But if we break that down a little bit, the 3:1 is like a bare minimum, but really you're looking for large texts, and that's sort of above 18 points. And if you go to, and the reality of designing is sometimes you have to squeeze stuff in. And if you go to about 14 points, you need to be really bolding that font to ensure that it's very clear and easy to read.
This goes back to what you were saying earlier about sort of dynamic design, right? And like sort of thinking of, I'm not just designing this button for this particular scenario, but like I need it to be scalable and across many different scenarios, right? Is that sort of what you were saying earlier?
That's exactly that. So that's what I mean by designing with, if you like, data points. So when you have a piece of text, it's not only ever going to be that color. You need to ensure that, let's say, for example, you have a design system with styles, with all the colors that you want to use. You need to ensure that all your foreground colors, or if you like, all your text colors, are accessible on all your background colors. And you can do that check at a system level, at a design system level, at the very base of all your styles. You can ensure that everything that the designers who are using this system are aware of what is AA or AAA accessible. And then you reduce a lot of the work. Like, nobody wants to go in and when they're designing an interface and go, okay, is this background correct against this sort of text color, and repeatedly do this across all the different font sizes and all the different responsive sizes, all these things. All these things you can do in a design system much early on to reduce the amount of time it will take for someone to just meet this perceivable principle. So yeah, I mean, the perceivable principle also encapsulates other things. So for example, like video captions on content. This is what I was talking about, like content design. You need to, and I think this video will be a good example of that, hopefully, where we will have video captions to give people understanding of the context of what that is. I think the second principle is the operable principle. And what these are things like menu systems. So when you're going through a menu, for someone who has a motor impairment, can they basically hit the tab button and navigate easily through your menu systems? And also, if you, let's say, for example, have got a component state where something is in focus when you're using this keyboard navigation, it's not just cool to note that when you're using your fancy mouse and you're hovering over a button, you get this cool sort of hover effect. This is much more about when someone's hitting that only tab button or whatever they're navigating with. Maybe they're a power user and they're using like arrows to navigate around.
Or shortcuts,
or shortcuts. It's in focus. You can tell what you're interacting with. And that's not just cues from the point of view of visual cues, but also sound cues. Those are important. Again, you're designing not just for the visual interface, but all those other data points, all those other users that may be using it. Okay. The third principle is the understandable principle. And this is going to come like a little bit of a shock to, I think, a lot of people, because sometimes I think designers tend to think, okay, I'm going to create this box, I'm going to create this component, and I'm going to allow people to fill it in with stuff, and the copy is not really my responsibility. I'm very sad to say that this is actually not the case. Readable language, right? I don't mean in terms of color contrast, but I mean just don't use jargon. And this is like a principle that we have at what3words, like just keep things
Yeah.
simple, and
Yeah.
accurate. Readable language is a part of the understandable principle. If you explain things with copy that is endlessly long, imagine someone who has to experience that from a piece of technology that basically dictates that to them.
Yeah.
They'll be there forever, and I
Yeah.
think that's a bit unfair. I think another one is of the understanding principles of like component states. So imagine someone who is, I think you mentioned this to me a few weeks ago. One of the most poor components that are created for accessibility is it's the date picker. It's a calendar picker. It's endless. There's so many different variations. I'll be honest with you, there's some sites that I use where I have to use this date picker component, and it's awful. It's awful. I struggle with it myself. But the understandable principle basically says, ensure that, let's say, for example, you have a list of items. You select a drop-down field that says, list item 1, list of 5, or list of 200. Now, visually, when you look at that, we just look at the scroll bar and we see, okay, this is a long list, so I know what's what here. But if you're someone who actually can't see the interface, and you need to know list 1 of 5 or list 1 of 200,
Yeah.
that makes a massive difference.
So understanding that in advance, yeah, because
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the last principle to look at here in terms of this sort of checklist is the robust principle. The robust principle are the things I think anybody can do, not just necessarily designers, but anybody. So as an example, alt text is part of the robust principle. Tag your images correctly so that when someone can't see the image and they're trying to scrolling through it, they get a general idea of what that image does. So it's part of that narrative. It's part of that content design storytelling process. And then the other one is, I suppose, making sure that any other sort of elements you have on the page, like H1s, H2s, they're being used with the relative technology. So in the same way that when Google kind of scrubs your page and goes through it, they will see sort of, here's the H1. So here's my title.
Yeah.
Here's my piece of description copy, or my body copy, my paragraphs. Here is my subtitle. In that way, using that sort of the way that HTML is effectively built, if you use those standards, it means that the robust principle is, it allows for that technology to more easily read your page and make it sort of scalable and understandable to a lot more people. So yeah, robust is an interesting one. It can be quite diverse, but it's very important. The last thing, I promise the last thing on this design checklist, it will be, you have no idea. You'll have a look at the WCAG guidelines, all right? This is way, way shorter.
I can confirm that.
The last one is, it's just my advice. It's about developer handoff. It comes back to what we said in the beginning about talking to many different people within the design process, and I include like front-end devs as part of this.
Yeah.
The developer handoff is this kind of thing that often people go, okay, I've done my pretty design, it's worked on my multiple user tests and whatever else you've done. Now I'm just going to go, okay, developer, do it.
Here, it's your problem.
Yes. Again, one of those things, it's just good design practice to do a comprehensive developer, sit with them, make them understand what the pieces are, set standards of accessibility. This is something where, like in a design system, you can create components that mirror the components that you have in Figma or whatever tool you use to ensure that you have a tab related to accessibility for that component, so you can specify those details. So you don't have to specify in every other variation that you're creating down the line. So the developer handoff is important, but anybody who's listening to this, who's a designer who's handed off to dev, will know it has never gone, here's my design, thank you, developer, they build it perfectly. That has never happened. And that's understandable, because you have to be able to create a scalable version of your design so that if the developer doesn't have enough time to implement that cool, amazing motion graphics transition that you thought was cool, that we can default to the native variation of
Yeah.
it. So it's
Yeah.
easy and simple to do it. So programmatic enhancement. Programmatic enhancement is what I believe is the right approach for this. You create a solid base so that you're taking all the accessibility criteria, and you're building a foundation so that if you need to build more complexity on top of it, such as a cool fancy animation, you can do that later. But if you do that in upfront and you make that a priority, but you forget some of the accessibility standards, it means growing that product, growing that interface will become a problem, because you have to come back to it. You have to take that image that was a title and redo the whole thing, and probably do all the translations related to it as well.
Yeah.
So developer handoff, don't underestimate it. And I promise you that
I think that's a great tip, the last one for sure. Yeah. It's one I haven't heard a lot. So it's a great one. I know we've talked about this, but what is your position, or what do you think is the role of user testing in all of this? Because we've talked about guidelines like WCAG guidelines, we've talked about specific things about the code or the design that need to happen, but you can do all of that and you can still miss, a user experience that's not accessible, and you might have all of the empathy in the team, or you might have all of the automated tools in the team and use them all, and you might still be missing some of the issues. So what do you think is the role of user testing when it comes to accessibility?
Simple answer, it's the gold standard for me. I think it is. Having seen some of the tests that you yourself have run, I think as designers, and I'd say to a certain extent developers, anybody involved in product, sometimes we have the propensity to get lost in our heuristic knowledge. So i.e., I'm an expert in this field. I have done all the possible research I can possibly do. I've gone through all the different academic points around this topic.
Yeah.
And I've made the perfect design system with all the components that could be possibly accessible. Therefore, the end experiences should work, right? Like, that's the theory. And to a certain extent, yes, you probably nip about sort of 60 to 70% of the issues in the bud. But the reality is, you can't be in an echo chamber. You have to make sure you can't be in this bubble, basically, of design internally. You need to validate the user flows like you would with any other test. You have to validate the user flows for someone who has an impairment. And that qualitative data is second to none, because you pick up things from people and users that you wouldn't be able to do it because simply you don't have that impairment. You could empathize as much as you want, but you may not have that impairment. I mean, you've done a few user tests here, Gigi. What do you think about this?
Yeah. So I'm just going to say one thing, which is one example, which I think for me just illustrates exactly everything you just said. So I was doing a sort of interview with another one of the designers in the team, and the format of a what3words address, by the way, is word.word.word. So that's the format of how you write a what3words address. And we were doing an interview with a user who is blind, and we asked him to type a 3-word address into the search bar. And so he typed word space word space word. And at that moment, our colleague in common and I looked at each other and we're like, of course. I mean, he doesn't know that there's 2 dots in between the 3 words because he's never seen them, and we've never told him that there's 2 dots in between the 3 words. We, no automated sort of tester tool is going to ever pick up on that. No empathy is going to pick up on that, because both her and I, we're obsessed with accessibility. We hadn't thought of that. I mean, we had to do a user test with someone who is blind to pick up on that issue. And I just love that example because I think it illustrates exactly why user testing is so important to have.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think that you have basically confirmed my my heuristic insight.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of the time that we have. I don't know, do you have anything you want to leave the audience with today, Iannish? Any sort of concluding thoughts?
Yes, I suppose for me it would be um, don't talk about it, do it. Just get started, make the mistakes. It's okay. I think the journey to accessibility is a rough one to a certain extent. You will not know everything. As people here who are having a chat about accessibility, and we've been involved with this for like what, a year and a half to 2 years now, we are not experts. But by far, I think this is the concluding thing that I'd like to emphasize. Thinking about accessibility as a design tool has massively improved our product.
Mm,
You know,
yeah,
it really has.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I would say that accessibility is actually simpler than people tend to think, right? So it looks very complex from the outside, but actually there's a few little things that you can do that are going to make a big difference, and they're not complicated to do. It's just about knowing them in advance and doing them as you're designing or as you're developing a product. So I would just, kind of demystify the fact that accessibility is so complex. It's actually, once you break it down and once you understand it, then it's actually quite, a few simple steps to take. And so I think I would just try to just encourage people to look into accessibility and try to input it. And if you're a designer and you've heard this talk, hopefully this would have given you a few things to get started with. Iannish, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's been a pleasure, Gigi. Let's do it again sometimes.
Definitely. All right. Happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day, everyone, and thank you for listening. Bye.